We were trained to work out, but what about working in? Whether the topics are mental health, meditation, spirituality, holistic medicine, or sexuality, host Josh Bieneman and guests have real conversations about balance and personal growth within the sports community. This is Locker Room Alchemy.
What's happening? I'm Josh Bieneman. Thank you for tuning in to episode number 2 of Locker Room Alchemy. In this episode, I'm going to get into my personal story with spirituality, which is, I guess, an atypical one, to say the least. It's going to range everything from ghosts in a haunted house that was used for satanic rituals before we moved in, and taking me through my teenage years and kind of formed through Catholicism and trying to rebound from that later into life to meditation and opening up my mind to other aspects of spirituality and phasing into self-growth. So it's a wild and bumpy ride. So buckle in, open your mind, and here we go. In order to give you the best foundation for my spiritual journey, I'm going to take you all the way back to my childhood. So this story is going to begin at 5 years old. At 5 years old, my mom's job was in carpet restoration service, which in layman's terms is going into houses after they sustain large damage after like a flood or a fire, and trying to clean it up to the best that they could and repair the carpets the best that they could. One of the houses they were working on was up for rent because they had evicted the tenants. And in retrospect, my mom agrees it was a terrible idea, but the price was extremely cheap because the fire damage was due to satanic worship. So my parents took it as an opportunity to get us out of what wasn't a great neighborhood and living in like a smaller row house into a big house, into a 4-bedroom house in what was really a really good neighborhood. And I guess it was worth them rolling the dice. So we move in and everything's all good. There's no problems for about 2 years or so. The first odd moment that stands out to me was Christmas morning, and I believe I was 7 or 8, so we've probably been living there for a couple of years then. And at probably around 6 a.m., something like that. It was early. I remember it still kind of being dark outside. I heard just thumping upstairs, and we all had our bedrooms on the main level. So you walk in the house, main level, going downstairs. The basement, upstairs is there's 2 more bedrooms. So I hear a thumping upstairs, and at 7, it's Christmas morning. Obviously, it's Santa Claus. So I just hang out and I'm listening to it, and it's just boom, 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 just like somebody was walking around up there. So we didn't have a chimney or anything, so I'm just kind of like thinking, okay, well, maybe he's got whatever the superpowers are. He's coming through the roof, and he's just, I don't know. But I'm just kind of envisioning this in my head. But there's no fear at all because it's Santa Claus. Like everything's good. Like, this is amazing. Like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to hear the man in action. So I'm hanging out listening to it, and probably like 5 minutes goes by and it's not going away. So my parents are right down the hall, and I was the only child at the time. So I walk down the hall and I knock on the door, and they say, come in. So I go in, and they're dead asleep. And I go right over to my mom. And she's listening for a couple seconds, and then we hear the thumping, and she grabs me and pulls me in bed, like right between my mom and dad. And the thumping continues. My dad is kind of groggy and waking up. And I remember how scared my mom looked. My mom's a tough ass woman. And I remember it was a different look. And as a kid, I'm just like, Mom, it's all good. Like, it's Christmas morning. Like, duh. Like, you know who it is. Like, get your head right, Mom. And like, this is awesome. So she's not as excited as I am when I'm explaining that, and she just holds me. And a few minutes goes by. My dad's kind of getting out of it, and he hears it, and he's a badass dude too, and he's just kind of a little bit hesitant, and it just kind of goes away. And that was what I thought was an awesome Christmas morning. And it turns out that it was the beginning of a long road. From there, the vibes were just different. I started to get scared a little bit. I wasn't necessarily like a scared kid by nature, and little things like, I know it sounds very normal, but like little things like going into the basement started to freak me out a little bit. And one of my chores was changing the laundry, and I hated it. I like hated it with a passion, because whenever you went in the basement, whenever I went in the basement, I always felt like there were just eyes on me. It wasn't a finished basement or anything; it was all cement, and I just felt like there was just a million eyes like all over the place, especially in the back room when you went back there. And but I didn't have like any proof or anything like that, so I couldn't get out of the chores. So at one day I just had finally had enough and just didn't want to go down there. And it's a weekend, I remember, because my dad's in the kitchen, my mom's standing right by the door, and my mom opens the door and tells me to stop being a baby and to get down there. And I shit you not, and this kind of gives me chills a little bit to even say, but shit you not, a woman called my name, and she says Josh, and my mom's standing right next to me because she opened the door, and she's kind of like almost like before was trying to like nudge me downstairs, and she pulls me back and shuts the door and was just pale as a ghost. And she told my dad. My dad didn't hear anything, but he was there and saw my mom, obviously in a panic. So my mom made my dad, even though this makes no logical sense. I don't know. I, I have to ask my mom why she did it, but she made him go get 2 deadbolts and put them on the door, so like leading down to the basement. Because I don't know. I don't know. It's just an added layer of protection. She obviously sent my dad down there in the basement. No one was down there and everything was secure, but it was peace of mind for her. So forever from that point, we had like huge 2 big ass deadbolts to go down into the basement door. My sister was born when I was 11 years old. And Gabby, if you're listening to this, I know you hate this shit and don't like hearing this stuff, but I slept in her bedroom because at this point, like everybody was over it. Like we're just done with this house. Nothing positive was happening. Like in a spiritual way, like if you're like, oh, that's fucking dope, like nothing good was happening. So we're about done. Everybody's just kind of sick of it. And so I'm sleeping in my newborn sister's room at this point, just because like I just need to be around somebody. And I was getting too old. My parents didn't want me sleeping with them, and I'll out myself. I was sleeping with my parents for like 2 years up to that, just because the house sucked, man. And so I'm sleeping in my sister's room, and she has a baby monitor. And my mom didn't tell me this till I don't know, 2 years after we had moved out. And but the reason that we moved out is that pretty much every night my mom would wake up and hear a woman calling my name through the baby's monitor. And Gabby, again, if you're listening to this, don't freak out. Mom said that she wasn't calling your name, but she was calling my name, and that was it. And so my mom and dad got the hell out of there. Moving into my teenage years, I took almost a cynical approach towards spirituality or Catholicism, because that's how I was. That was my background, and this is kind of like the time of the Catholic priests fallout with the molestations and all the shit that was going on for years and years and years. So for me, it was a perfect opportunity to kind of say, "Aha!" Like there's flaws in this, and I don't know that it was anything other than I was just mad. I was just mad at the idea of what I thought religion was and spirituality was, because what people were telling me in school wasn't the shit that I had experienced as a kid. And it was so far away from that. And everybody just trying to make it seem like the light and all this bullshit. And that if you live a good life, then you'll go to the heaven. And I was fucking haunted. I'll be honest, guys. Like I carried this stuff for a long time, and I still do to a certain extent. So I was bitter. I was bitter that I felt like I got the short end of the stick. That wasn't the stuff that I was able to experience. This attitude continued on into my early adulthood. And even though I was still bitter, I never really lost touch with, I guess, the light, or that was Jesus for me. And it was almost like a breakup. It was like I broke up with my girl, but I'm still checking her Instagram every now and then. You know what I mean? Just seeing what she's up to, and making sure I still have a little control over the situation. So that's kind of what I would do, and especially during bad times, I would kind of go back to Jesus, or fall back to faith for momentarily, privately. I wasn't very public about it. I didn't like go to church or talk to family about it, but that was kind of my default. And I really think it was because I knew that that was the opposite of what that I was taught. That was the opposite of the bad. So that was the opposite of what I was experiencing as a child. So at a default, I'm going to try to go there if there's a problem. It was really as simple as that. As I started to experience a lot of anxiety and depression in my adult life, I started to become very pragmatic. I became very compartmentalized, and not in a materialistic sense. And my wife can attest to that. I'm not the most organized when it comes to like material, spatial stuff, but as far as my thoughts, I became very good at boxing things up and learning different ways, coping mechanisms of where to place those boxes. Not necessarily the healthiest places to put those boxes, but I found my own workarounds. By the time I was in my late 20s, I had done so much maneuvering and dancing and shifting for all these battles with these self-inflicted, these internal battles with myself. And some of those stories are on episode 1 if you're interested and haven't listened to that. But at this point, just getting up and going to work every day, or getting up and smiling, walking out in the living room to see my kids every day, became so exhausting. I was able to do it, thank God, and still live a functioning life. But it was absolutely exhausting. And by the end of the day, I had just had nothing left. So my priorities at that point, the way I saw it, praying sure as hell was not high on that list. I didn't have fucking time for it. Like, are you kidding me? And even to start thinking about praying, I start kind of poking the bear a little bit and saying, wait a minute, if I'm praying to something, the opposite of that person's the one that got me into this damn mess. It's that person's boys. That's your fucking problem. Like, I don't involve me with this shit. I was just so separated from it. But I put it in a nice little box. I took it up to the attic and I threw it in the corner and left it there. The best way I can explain of how that box got out of the attic was not sure as hell not that I went up there and took it down. It's more like somebody opened up the attic door and kicked that motherfucker down, like, and kicked it on me. And I had to figure out what was in that box and remember and face the things that were in that box. Otherwise, I wasn't going to be able to get out of the mess. This is a part of the story where things get a little bit funky, and I'm okay. I'm 100% okay. I guess divulging this shit and just getting it off my chest publicly, because I've followed, I guess, what I've experienced so long, and it's led to so many positive improvements in my life and the people around me in my life, that I don't give a shit. If you think I'm crazy, then I really could give two shits. Like, I don't care anymore. So I'm going to speak my story, my journey, and I guess this new chapter of my spirituality, and see what happens. I had my first, I guess, quote unquote experience in June of 2019, and it came in a float tank, which I'll get to here in a second, what a float tank is. But to lay the foundation for where my head was at this point, were my interests laid at this point. I was about 6 months into what I would literally classify as like a Google search for how to deal with anxiety and depression. And if you get your list of 5 things, I was kind of working my way down the list. So I started with psychiatry, and then I checked that box. Therapy, checked that box. I had started smoking marijuana at night and trying to learn how to use that as an anti-anxiety thing. I had started meditation. I downloaded an app called Headspace, and now I was on to floating. So I was just kind of working my way down of trying to figure out ways to cope. I was reading books, and things were good. And I'm not trying to shit on that. It was working. Like I was, not everything I was trying was working, but I was finding things that I could kind of add to my toolbox. So I decided to try floating. And for anyone that is not familiar with it, floating is, imagine kind of like a little jacuzzi, but it's like a little pod and has like a little roof or cover over it. And some of them, actually, it's kind of like you go into a wall almost, like you're opening up the door, and it's kind of like a chamber that you can go into. I've done both of them. Some are more comfortable with the pod just because you can kind of open, close it. You can feel like you have a little bit more control of it. But essentially, you're laying down on your back. You're in 10 inches of water, and there's 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt in the water. So you're completely buoyant. Where it gets wild is that the idea of it is to completely take away all of your senses. So it's completely pitch black. You can't hear anything. The water is body temperature, I believe. Don't quote me on that. All I know is it's the same temperature designed to feel where, or sense where you can't sense where the water ends and your body begins. And it gets pretty damn close. It really does. Like if you're laying there and there's not a lot of ripples going around in the pod, I mean, you can really kind of lose touch of where the hell your extremities are. It's definitely trippy. It's probably not for, or it's definitely not for everybody. But if you're comfortable with water and that sounds like it's something that's doable, I would definitely check it out. They're starting to grow, and there's some chains, so most likely there's one near you. But during this first float, I'm laying there. I'm about 30 minutes in. I'm starting to kind of relax, and it is very possible to fall asleep and you won't drown in there. So I feel like I'm kind of drifting off to sleep, and it's like right that moment right before you fall asleep where it's just like complete relaxation. I just saw this light, and it was like I thought it was in the pod. Like it was just this big ass bright light, and I'm sitting there in the pod, and but I realized like I can see all around. I can see like almost 360 all the way around me. And then I realized like I'm looking at the light, looking up, down, and I realize like I'm the light. It's me in the middle, and I can see everything around me. And then as soon as I realized that, boom, it's just black again. My immediate reaction to it was like, what the fuck was that? Like it was just, it wasn't that's the best way I can describe my immediate reaction to it. And I kind of just stood, like sat up. So you're only kind of like in a little bit of water. So I sat up, just kind of looked around, kind of just, I wasn't like, it wasn't like adrenaline. It wasn't like like you wake up in a nightmare. I was chill, but I was just like very, very intrigued and curious what had just happened. And then I just kind of brushed it off, I guess. And not brushed it off, but I just kind of, I don't know. It's hard to describe. I don't know if anyone else is listening has had that experience. You look back and you think like you should have been a lot more scared, but for some reason it seems, even though it's completely unnatural, it seems somewhat natural. So I laid back down in the water, and I just finished the rest of the float. The days following this, I was super, super relaxed, and I've never experienced a float where I was that relaxed since. I wish I did, but I was super relaxed for about 2 to 3 days and just in a really good headspace. And once I started kind of getting back towards reality and problems, just normal life stuff. I guess it's kind of, if you've ever had a massage, I imagine it's the same. You're probably just don't have a care in the world for a day or so. And then like life hits you and like, fuck. So that's where I was. And that's when I started kind of drifting back towards what I saw in the float pod and wondering if I could try to recreate that. The issue was that floating is not cheap. It, depending on where you go, it's anywhere between like $40 to $120 an hour. So I knew I wasn't going to be able to do that on a regular basis. So I just tried to create my own little ghetto version of that. What I did was try to combine meditation with the position or posture that I was in the float tank. So at that point, I had just been doing like headspace and guided meditation. I tried a couple times with just like some nature sounds in the background, but my go-to was just like the crisscross applesauce, sit down, 10 to 20-minute meditation, just work on breath. But I said, I'm just going to try this laying down, a little bit unconventional. And I had been smoking marijuana for around 6 months. So I started in January. So 6 months at this time. And I knew that definitely made me feel more comfortable, like less judgmental. So I decided to kind of stick those two together and play around with that. So I laid down. What I did was I laid down on my couch, and I also put like a beanie on and pulled it over my eyes to try to simulate just a complete blackout. Took a couple hits of the vape cartridge and just laid down and try to like recreate that surrender posture or pose that I had in the float tank with my hands above my head. I did this every other day for around 3 weeks, and I got nothing. Zero, nothing. They were good meditations, don't get me wrong, and I still meditate mainly laying down today, so I definitely found a sweet spot there. But as far as trying to recreate something mystical or trying to see behind the curtain again, I definitely didn't have any experiences like that. And I started to kind of go back into pragmatic Josh. I got back into cynical guy. Yeah, maybe this all was bullshit. And I started to feel dumb. I started to start judging myself again for doing that. And I was saying, you dumbass, what are you doing out here on the couch again, trying to make some weird magical shit that doesn't exist happen. And then one night I remember I was doing the meditation. I just kind of reached apathy. I'd reached the point where I was like, I'm not mad about this anymore. I'm just over it. I just want to move on. This was a stupid idea and I'm just over it. And as I was thinking about sitting up, out of nowhere, and I still had the beanie covering my eyes at this point, out of nowhere, this blue light cloud, something. Something I had never seen, just completely kind of engulfs my mind or my third eye or my mind's eye, whatever you want to call it. Imagination, if you want to be cynical, which is fine. Absolutely just blast me, and not in a like pretty, here comes a moving cloud, like just like a water, like a fireman's hose, just drenched and absolutely overwhelming. And then I see through the middle of that comes a woman's face, and she just gives me this grin and just says, you're not ready and you eat too much late at night. And the look was something that just absolutely shook me to my core, because it was like she just like looked straight through me. Like she knew, she called me on my bullshit basically. And my whole life, I always had a thing for women that had a little bit of a bitch in them, and that's the best analogy I could give. Is she seemed loving. It seemed like a loving, absolute haymaker. And it was tough love, and she was just giving me that look, and she was just kind of giving me that streak of bitch, and said, "Get your shit together, homeboy." I won't lie when I say I was scared shitless. Absolutely scared shitless. It was not what I thought at the time a very positive experience. And I jumped up. After that, I walked around, and it was almost like I wanted to like repent. That I go back to like my Catholicism reference of that schoolboy of wanting to go like confess your sins. Like, fuck, like shit, somebody knows that like I'm not taking care of my shit. because I was a slob at that time. I would just come home at 9 o'clock after work and just slam a whole pizza or just eat a whole bag of chips. I was a slob, and I was insecure about it too. And that was kind of like my coping mechanism, one of my numbing tools at night that I was not able to get rid of at that time, even though I was able to begin shedding some of my bad habits. So I don't get much sleep that night, and then the next day it's a Saturday, a rare Saturday in the summer where I had nothing to do. The family was all home, and I was just so quiet. I was so quiet, and my wife had saw some changes. She had saw that I was starting to make some positive personality shifts, and she thought I was kind of going back into a depression. So she wanted to talk about it, and I did not at all. I didn't know what happened, and I just wanted to go out and like nature. I just had this overwhelming need to like see trees and water, and it was not in like a magnetic sense, almost like in a repentive sense. Like, I screwed up, I'm dirty, I need to get back to nature. Even though I never was into nature, I felt the need to kind of get back there, kind of the plug back in. And it was the first time I ever felt any connection to trees or anything like that. I was city boy. um, I wouldn't even notice a waterfall on the side of the road. I could give two shits prior to this. We hiked that day probably 3 or 4 hours, and I remember just walking around so quiet and just feeling like I absolutely just had my manhood stolen from me. Like, this blue woman, whatever the hell this nightmare, dream, whatever hallucination that I had really, like, I mean, this is 12 hours later, and I feel like I was missing something. Like, I truly felt like something clicked in my brain or something. Like, I was missing like my manhood. So, to say the least, this was an extremely humbling experience. So I spend the next few days just trying to do some research, thinking that like I broke something, like I broke my brain, like, because what I thought I was missing wasn't coming back. I felt like I turned off the testosterone by accident, like screwing around like with weed and meditation. I'm like, Jesus Christ, like I really did some damage. So I'm like Googling all this type of stuff. Like, is meditation harmful? Is smoking weed with meditation harmful? And I'm looking up like blue lady in meditation. And the only thing that makes sense from all the research that I'm looking through is the one thing that I don't think makes sense. And that's that the blue lady was actually like something that other people saw and signified something. And that lady, or the goddess, named Kali, who's a Hindu goddess. And I never messed with like Hinduism or anything like that. And I started like looking at pictures and trying to do some surface level research, and everything about it is just like really, really scary. She's like holding heads of men, and that says like she like castrates men and takes their masculinity. And like, that's the only thing that makes sense. But in a weird way, I didn't think she was evil. Like, all these pictures made her look evil, and with blood and all, like knives. And even though like I was like, yeah, like I really feel like that blue lady like chopped my manhood off. Like, it's not this testosterone or this masculinity. My ego wasn't coming back, but I felt like that she was doing it for a loving purpose, because it was just, I kept going back to like that moment where I saw it, like that little glimmer, like, that bitch, man. I got you. I'm gonna call you out on your shit, but I got you. And I wanted to see her again. That was a point where it actually became a spiritual practice, where I decided to sink my teeth in a little bit and not only work through the meditations and try to see if I can go a little bit farther and kind of experiment with it, but I also wanted to research and now become a seeker and try to find out as much as I could about some of the experience that I had had so far, and started kind of wanting to know some of the secrets. It took well over 3 months until I had the next experience, and it had to do with my spine. So I say 2 weeks leading up to this point, I started having some lower back pain, and generally when I had lower back pain, it was just because I was a out of shape piece of shit. I like just bending over to pick up baseballs or something and throw my like back out like an old ass man. But it was a little bit different. It felt like my spine, like it was in my spine, and it was pretty painful actually. I didn't know what it was, and it was actually bothering me during meditation when I was laying down. And one of the nights I was meditating, and then I generally saw like this little dot. They call it like the eye or whatever, and I just kind of look at that and stare at that guy. But nothing would really happen. But my goal was to just kind of lock onto that as long as I can. I kind of made it like a little game. The longer I can lock onto that, the longer I can be focused. Well, at this point, when I locked onto that eye, the pain in my spine started almost feeling like it was like electricity or like fire. It was like almost like a burn, like icy hot almost. That's probably the best description I can give. Like an icy hot on the base of your spine, and then it just started kind of slowly going up, where I start to kind of like curl my back. So I'm laying back at this point and kind of like arching my back, and then it just shoots like an intense like bottle rocket up my spine and all the way, like feels like it just blasts out the top of my head, and I'm just like pinned with my shoulders and ass and against like the couch, and then my torso just like all the way pushed up, and I'm in this position for about 10 seconds, and I'm just not breathing. I'm just trying to control my self and just slowly start to breathe, and I kind of like slowly go back down. And once I kind of reach the couch again with my full body, I saw the blue lady. Quick sidebar: if you're into some of the esoteric stuff, look up Jacob's Ladder and like sacred secretion, the 33 vertebrae, and Christ dying at 33 years of age, and the hill of Calvary. It's wild. It's wild. I didn't find this stuff out till around 3 months later from a friend of mine who I kind of stumbled upon. But it has to do with the spine and ascension. So it's very, very interesting if you're into that type of stuff, or if you've had something similar with your spine. Well, back to the Blue Lady or Callie. I saw her every night for 5 nights, and these meditations lasted anywhere between an hour and 5 hours. And I can't do that now. It was just, it was something about that week, and it was something about that moment. There's no way I can go into a 2 to 5 hour meditation and have that type of discipline right now. But I was able to do it. So obviously I didn't sleep very much, and it was a wild ass week. It was like I was downloading information. That's the best way I can explain it. The first 3 nights, and it was all my shit. It wasn't like shit that I can go save the world with. It was like my own problems from as far back as I can remember. So the first 3 nights, I'm basically just kind of like seeing all my blind spots, like how I messed up with this relationship with this person, or how I slighted this person, but it was very judgment free. And the blue lady was there the whole time, and kind of walked me through it. So I felt at peace with it. I felt like I was healing myself for the first 3 nights, and it felt very natural. I was having really good days, both with my family and at work. Like it was just 3 like good vibration days. And then the final 2 nights were just hell. Literally, they were just hell. It was the first time I started having real dark meditations, and I just got absolutely nailed for, I guess, what I thought was the byproduct of all the stuff that I just learned that I wasn't paying attention to, and the people that I had slighted. So it was kind of like I was facing that, and but it wasn't an external judgment. It was my own judgment, and kind of recognizing that the fears in my life were created from that. It was kind of a weird mirrored insecurity, this own prison that I've created based on the things that I've done to other people. So I don't know if that makes any sense. That's the best way I can explain it. But it was 5 nights of just a wild, wild roller coaster. The final part of that 5-day stretch was a brief period of just absolute bliss that I felt it just came out of nowhere. It was the last day, and I was we were outside with my family. I don't know if it was a weekend or all I know is I just wasn't at a baseball game that night. And we're outside, and all of a sudden I just felt like a bubble popped, and I just kind of like was popped in a new world. It's the same world, but a new world, and I just felt like overwhelmed with like just like appreciation, like out of nowhere. It was just kind of the weirdest emotion just hit me, and I just felt so much gratitude, just kind of like be alive. It was very, very odd, but very, very cool. And I started crying, and like my wife, again, during this time, she just knows I seem happy, but I'm meditating a lot and don't seem to be sleeping a lot. So she's like, what the fuck is going on now? So she kind of was like, what's going on? I'm like, I don't know, baby. I love you. Like, I'm sorry. I treated you so bad. And she was like, what are you talking about? Oh, and it was kind of like, I knew that the shit that I had been dealing with the previous 2 nights, like I knew that like it was going to be all right. Like that little period was over. And now I kind of had a second chance to do better, to be a better husband, to be a better father. And it was like I got a 5-day download of all my problems. It was kind of like midlife. Someone was kind enough to grade my test for me before I die, show me my test, and give me a second chance to fill in with the right answers. And that's what I've been trying to do since. It's not as divine as maybe it seems. It took me a long time to get a lot of shit out of my head, and being able to even communicate to my wife about it, who still, I'm sure, thinks I'm a little odd. But it's taken a long, long time to do this, but it's became part of my life now, and just trying to find a new love story in life. And the greatest love story ever told, and that's loving myself and you loving you. And that's why I decided to do this podcast, among other reasons, is to better learn how to understand myself and share that with other people. So that is my story, and I appreciate you listening.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Please help raise the vibe by sharing this podcast with friends and family. For more real conversations, show notes, and to connect, head over to lralchemy.com. Until next time, peace.